Hello and welcome to this recording of the Professional Research and Data Group COVID-19 Intelligence and Impact April 2021 update, where we report on up-to-date data and statistics from some of the members of the group. I'm Regine Sonderland Saga and I'm a research associate at the Institute of Place Management, and I will be taking you through this month's data pack. I want to remind you that it's good to share data, and this data pack will be available in the High Street Task Force repository. You can access the repository via this URL, and if you search for PRDG, this and all previous Insights report will come up in the results. And also please remember to cite each source correctly. So for example, if you are using data from the slides containing data from Office for National Statistics, cite their source directly as shown below. Professional Research and Data Group is part of the High Streets Task Force, which has been funded by government to support people transform their high streets and town centres. Here we see an overview of the member organisations of the Professional Research and Data Group. In this month's data pack, we have an update on UK footfall data from the Institute of Place Management and Springboard. We then have an opening up review of data, again by IPM and Springboard. We then have an update on social media monitoring data from Maybe. And last, we have an update on business and retail sales impacts of COVID-19 using data from Office for National Statistics. We start off with the update on UK footfall data. Footfall in the UK has been falling since the end of February 2020, and in order to provide an accurate picture of the fluctuation of current footfall levels, we compare against the 2019 baseline. So footfall on the 11th of May 2021 was down 40.8% compared to the same day in 2019, but up 7% compared to the same day last week. The overall trend this lockdown is that footfall is slowly and gradually going up, as also seen in previous lockdowns. As lockdown measures gradually eases, we can expect to see footfall increase accordingly. We also look at footfall by town signature type, and we have 4 different signatures. Starting with holiday towns, they are busy in the summer and quiet in the winter. They focus on offering a good experience to visitors during the summer peak, rather than on their local catchment. They are attractive to tourists, but have a relatively weak comparison offer. Next, we have speciality towns, which gets busier after Easter, with the largest peak in footfall occurring in the summer, followed by a smaller peak just before Christmas. Anchors are not retail-based, offering something unique and special, so for example around heritage and culture. They attract visitors but do also serve the local population. Multifunctional towns have a relatively flat footfall throughout the year with no noticeable peaks, and the retail offer, opening times, events, services and other users are focused on the local community. They have convenience anchors, work, public transport, shopping, markets and so on, and they organise themselves to be reliable community hubs. Lastly, we have comparison towns, and they have a noticeable peak in footfall in the lead up to Christmas. They have a wide range of retail choice, leisure, food and beverage, and strong retail anchors and a presence of international brands. People travel a considerable distance to visit, and they serve a wide catchment area. So on the 11th of May 2021, in holiday towns, footfall was down 38.5% compared to the same day in 2019 and down 0.8% compared to the same day last week. In speciality towns, footfall was down 42.7% compared to the same day in 2019, but up 13% compared to the same day last week. In multifunctional towns, footfall was down 38.4% compared to the same day in 2019, but up 6% compared to the same day last week. And lastly, in comparison towns, footfall was down 45.1% compared to the same day in 2019, but up 4.2% compared to the same day last week. Next up, we have Professor Kathy Parker from the Institute of Place Management and Diane Whirl from Springboard, who will provide an opening up review of data.
In this section, we're going to review some of the sources of data that we have that helps the task force monitor really what's happened as lockdown restrictions have been lifted and we start to open up in England. So Nikos and myself have had a little bit of a look at footfall. We're not going to dwell on this because I know, Di, you've been looking at this in a lot more depth. So just a few sort of headline figures here, and with the research team in the background, make sure that I don't say anything that I shouldn't. What we thought might be useful to just map out, the gradual sort of, we saw football was sort of gradually going up anyway, even under restrictions. There seems to be a bit of a fatigue when you lock people down, that they stay locked down, but they can't stay in forever. So they do start to creep back out, even though restrictions haven't been changed. So we saw that sort of from the beginning of the year. So this graph starts at the beginning of 2021. And what we will do is just in the background, we'll start to look at the sort of vaccine rollout, but as expected, as people feel more confident. Simon's had one of his vaccines, so he's up in Manchester shopping. I went to meet him. He missed that out yesterday. We had a couple of nice gin and tonics together on Canal Street, so I've had my vaccine too. So this is what we do when we feel a bit more confident. But a huge, obviously, uplift as before when non-essential retail opens up again. And then this is quite interesting here, which is the first Sunday, as pubs and things were open. It was a nice day as well. So that's actually the most footfall we've seen since COVID started to impact on people's behaviour last year. So, and as I said, Di will talk about the town types as well. It's not equal how COVID sort of has impacted. We know last year in the summer, because of people's sort of foreign travel being restricted and so on, the holiday types very, very popular in England, as people sort of went for days out and holidays to towns that had historically really been seeing quite a massive decline in their footfall. And then we thought it might be just interesting to compare 4 weeks after that non-essential retail had been opened up again. So that happened on Monday the 15th of June in 2020, and a similar opening up was Monday the 12th of April 2021 in England. Sort of quite a big difference though, in that it was only non-essential retail that opened up on Monday the 15th of June in 2020, whereas we had outside hospitality and non-essential retail opening up in 2021. But not that dissimilar. You sort of see some of that pent-up demands coming out, people shopping in the first few days, but then things going sort of dropping down again. The sort of difference that I see in this data is that Monday, because perhaps it was just retail that was open, Monday was the popular day immediately after the restrictions were lifted last year, whereas Saturday and Sunday have been popular days in the 4 weeks after non-essential retail and outside hospitality open this year. But we'll keep tracking it. We know last year from the footfall data, Saturday stopped being the busiest shopping day, footfall being spread out a lot through other days, especially Tuesday to Friday. So we'll look for that later as we get more weeks of footfall data. But if I can hand over to you now, Di, because I think you've been doing a lot more on this. And are you all right if I move on the slides for you?
Yeah, I can say those famous words. Next slide, please. I feel very important. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just talk about give some context and talk about what happened last year, because that sort of feeds into where and our knowledge and where we are this year, really. So as Kathy said, we looked at the 4 town types, and this is footfall trend, year on year percentage change, 2020 versus 2019, from week 1 of 2020 through to week 53. So, and you can see that comparison towns underperformed the 3 others all the way through the year. And that's because stores were shut, and obviously a lot of comparison towns, some of those are quite large as well, so a lot of people working from home, so inevitably that dragged comparison towns down. And of course, as Kathy mentioned, the staycations in the summer and also the Eat Out to Help Out scheme really helped the holiday towns, but they all largely followed the similar pattern of footfall. So, but at the end of the year, holiday towns ended up at sort of half what they were in 2019, and comparison towns were sort of a third. So,
and can I just chime in with a comment? Yeah. I think if you'd asked me in 2017, 2018, what the future of holiday towns was, I would have said it was pretty bleak.
I know.
And here they come fighting back.
I know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens when tourism opens up and we're all flooding off to Spain and Greece and France again. But, you know, at the moment, this is really supporting our small holiday towns, which is fantastic. And even our speciality towns, you know, they're benefiting from that, because you've got some of the, in the speciality signature, you've got some towns that some of us might regard as holiday towns, but they've obviously got a speciality signature. So it's really interesting to see that. Next slide, please. One of the key themes last year, which is important for this year, is this rise of localism. So it's the greater resilience of smaller places, and that's because obviously we're not traveling, we're working from home, and it's very much a contraposition from the year before. So in 2019, the larger cities, central London, outer London, regional cities, all saw smaller losses in footfall than our smaller towns, our market towns, our coastal towns, our historic towns. 2020, the situation reversed. That's because we were all at home. And it's that, I mean, if, you know, if anything good's going to come out of COVID, maybe it's the opportunity for our smaller towns to fight back. And, you know, we are rediscovering our small towns and people are much more loyal to them, but we're still staying local because we're local. We're not going to our offices, apart from Simon, as much as, you know, we used to. But glad to see you fighting the retail flag, Simon. Good for you. But yeah, central London is still having a really, really tough time. And, you know, it's a blend of the fact they haven't got any tourists, people don't want to use public transport, people working from home, and also none of the leisure is open yet. So that's really where we stood last year. Next slide, please. And then I know we're a high street task force, but it's important to understand context between where people are shopping, and retail parks by far were the most resilient. And that's because they had essential retailers on them, but also because they are open air, they're easy to get to by car, so you don't have to use public transport, parking's free, and also stores are big, so they're very, very COVID friendly. And that was a trend that endured throughout last year. Next slide, please. So lockdown versus reopening this year. Next slide. So what I've done here is I've just looked at the trend, and this is sort of thing that Kathy was referring to, looking at the trend in lockdown 1 2020 versus lockdown 3 2021. So in lockdown 1, footfall generally was staying at a lower level than we were this year, and this is about the lockdown fatigue. You know, as Kathy said, you know, there's only so long people will stay inside, and people are feeling more confident. But also in lockdown 3, schools were open and they weren't in lockdown 1, and that of course created footfall traffic. So we ended lockdown 3 at a higher level than we did in lockdown 1. Next slide, please. And then what happened reopening week? Well, I foolishly, as I am so foolish all the time, I put a forecast together for what's going to happen in reopening week. Well, that was blown out the water completely. I knew there was a huge amount of pent-up demand, but I didn't understand quite how much. The opening week footfall rose overall across all of our retail destinations by 88%, but in high streets, footfall doubled. So the increase across all of our high streets week on week was 93.2%, and that meant that the year-on-year position, and now we're looking at 2021 versus 2019, because obviously we've overlapped with lockdown 1 here, so we don't want to be comparing it against lockdown 2020. We moved from a position of 65% drop in footfall from 2019 to 35%. So the year-on-year position strengthened by a half, which is fantastic. Retail parks, I just must point these out. They had a much smaller increase week on week in opening week of only 35%. And actually at the end of opening week, they were just 2%. Footfall was just 2% below the 2019 level. So they are really strong. And, you know, years and years ago, when I started working back in the 80s with Simon, you know, we were talking about the threat of out of town for high streets. I don't think it's ever been more relevant than now. You know, we were worried when they were functional wallpaper and nail places, you know, and how that was going to impact high streets. They are miniature high streets now. In fact, have a lot more going for them, some of our high streets. So, you know, I think we need to just be cognizant of retail parks are doing really well. They're strengthening all the time. And that is, you know, we talk about online being a concern, but actually retail parks are equal, if not more. Next slide, please. So here I start to look at the signatures in opening week as well. And they, you know, the uplift from week to week in that opening week varied. The biggest uplift was comparison, because everyone flooded back to stores. Everyone wanted to go shopping. I think we've all seen the pictures of Primark, queues outside Primark. That really is just testament to how much people wanted to get into bricks and mortar stores and go back into the high street. And the smallest increase of only 75% was in speciality towns. But actually that's improved the year-on-year position enormously. So we're sitting at around about a third lower than 2019 at the moment across all of the town types. Next slide, please. And then the subsequent 3 weeks, well, this has been really interesting, because obviously we had this huge uplift in the first week, and then it sort of petered out really. And part of that, I have to say, is the weather. And I mean, it's been a long time since I've talked about the weather in relation to high streets and retail. It's great to be able to talk about weather in terms of impacting, because it's almost back to where we're getting towards normality. But the weather turned colder, and it was rainier, and so people weren't really that keen on going outside, if truth be told. And so high street footfall was more severely impacted than shopping centre or retail park footfall. And also, of course, only outdoor hospitality is open, so it's a bit blustery and a bit rainy to be sitting outside eating. But this suggests that next week, when indoor hospitality opens, footfall's going to have another boost. Next slide, please. So where are we 3 weeks post reopening week? So across all retail destinations, 25% down. In high streets, just over a third down, 35.6 down. Retail parks, as I said, literally 1.3% below 2019. I mean, staggering, really. And that's because people just feel so confident in going to these places. And, you know, if they didn't shop in retail parks beforehand, they certainly started to do it during lockdown and post-lockdown. Next slide, please. What I'm going to do now is just look at these town types, because this is all about the localism issue that I mentioned. Next slide, please. So lockdown 1 versus lockdown 3. You can see that the order of merit, so-called, is the same. It's, you know, smaller towns have been more resilient than the bigger places in both lockdowns, although slightly strengthening position in lockdown 3, because obviously pent up demand and more people were out, more people were feeling confident, a lot more people vaccinated. So slight improvement during lockdown 3 than lockdown 1. Next slide, please. And then comparing reopening in 2020 versus reopening in 2021, you could see the gains made by the smaller places. Everyone, yes, we flooded back to, you know, major retail centres because we wanted to shop, but actually outer London did phenomenally well. People are still working from home, so those who live and work within Greater London aren't going into their offices still, and so they're shopping in outer London. But also market towns and our smaller coastal and historic towns did reasonably well. London is lagging to a certain extent, but regional cities outside central London are starting to pick up, which is really interesting. So it possibly is a London factor that people don't want the commute, they don't want the expense, they like working from home, and that's impacting London. So that's going to be one of the challenges and issues that London's going to have to address moving forward. Next slide, please. And so what I've done here is just brought in the couple of other key indicators. One, online spending, of course, and two, our vacancy rates. We do a quarterly vacancy rate survey at Springboard. So next slide, please, looking at online. I mean, we know that online went up. I mean, you know, it started the year last year, 2020, at 20% of total retail spending. It went up to nearly around about a third, dropped back down to 26.4% when retail reopened, and then went up again as we went into lockdown 2 in November and then lockdown 3 in January. It is UK-widely, but I have to say, I know that you speak as chair of Scottish Towns. The data is retail UK-wide. The majority of footfall across the UK is driven by England. I hate to say that to people from outside of England, but so it doesn't really impact the overall numbers. If I would just use English figures, they would be very similar. Moving forward onto vacancy rates. What I've done here is just pull out a non-food retail, because this is actually quite interesting. You can see the huge increase that happened in non-food retail during lockdown 1. Nearly a half of all non-food retail was online, which is quite interesting, because most non-food retail stores were closed. You could only really buy non-food in food stores. And then it nearly reached that peak during December when we went into lockdown 3, but it actually has dropped down. And this is interesting because these ONS numbers are still only to March, and we hadn't reopened in March. So even though retail hadn't reopened, non-food online spending had dropped back down. So I'm anticipating when we get certainly the April and then certainly the May, we're going to see quite a reduction in online as people have headed back to stores. Next slide, please. Store vacancies. I mean, this doesn't really present a particularly great picture, if I'm honest. Our vacancy rate currently is about 11.5% across the UK. It has dropped back down slightly from in April from January. So our surveys are done off quarter, but every 3 months. And the reason we do it in January and April is because we were able, in normal times, able to capture the pop-ups and temporary lets that occurred around Christmas, and we were able to pick up the impact of the opening and closures of those in November and January, or October and January. It's interesting with the reduction in the vacancy rate, although it's still very high, we've seen a slight improvement, and that's possibly due to the greater prevalence of pop-up and temporary lets at the moment. You know, pop-ups are starting to become much more accepted by landlords across the piece. You know, we've seen some very big, you know, iconic shopping centres accepting pop-ups quite readily now, and certainly happening in high streets. Next slide, I think is that me done? I think it is actually. Yes. Oh, next phase, reopening of indoor hospitality. So when we opened in 2020 after lockdown 1, we didn't have any hospitality open for a couple of weeks. And then 2 weeks later in July, we opened hospitality. And you can see what happened. So we had this big uplift in the reopening week when we opened retail of around 40% across the piece, 47% in high streets. And then when hospitality, indoor hospitality, or hospitality as a whole reopened 4 weeks later, it went up by a further 17% from the week before. So we had this additional boost. We're expecting a boost when indoor hospitality opens. I think everyone recognises that whilst it's lovely when the weather's fantastic to sit outside in a pub garden, not so perfect when it's cold and it's raining. So, and also, of course, the majority of indoor hospitality is in high streets. So the minute that's open, that's going to really give a boost to high streets, but also, I have to say, to shopping centres as well, because that's a lot about daytime hospitality and shopping centres. So what are we expecting in terms of the impact on the change from 2019 through to 2021? Well, I'm anticipating that next week we're going to see a shift from this drop of 35.6% to 27%, just because of this uplift in footfall. Possibly moving into positive territory in retail parks, because there's obviously a lot of family-friendly indoor hospitality outlets in retail parks, and they've not been used yet. And in shopping centres also a slightly lesser increase, but they're in a slightly improved position generally in terms of their relative footfall, or their footfall relative to 2019. So that's my projection, and we'll see if I'm right next week. And then what's going to happen in terms of retail footfall recovery? Well, this is a question I'm asked a lot by the media. So I thought I'd just put some thoughts, and they're only simply my thoughts around it. But the extent to which we recover back to where we would have been pre-COVID, and that's still below where we would have been the previous year, because I think we need to remember that there's a long-term downward shift in footfall all the time anyway. That was 1.5% across all retail destinations a year, around 2% a year in high streets. So that was happening anyway. So, you know, that is 4% straight away, not compounded in 2 years. So we've got to allow for the fact we would never have necessarily got to 2019 level anyway. But certainly the extent to which people continue to transfer purchases online will be a big issue, or will they then revert back to their old shopping habits of shopping in store? I think there'll be some permanent transference to online, certainly around the functional purchasing, because a lot more people have learned how to do it and are actually now quite comfortable with it and see it's quite convenient. The extent to which we go back to our offices, are we going to continue to work at home half the week, all the week? We just don't know. A lot of big employers have said they're happy for people to work home for the next year. Other people say they want them in their offices. So that's really quite split, and that will be split by type of town and also by geography as well. Tourism, how quickly will tourism open up? At the moment, we don't know. Outward bound tourism and also inward bound tourism, we have no foreign tourists at the moment, and that's going to impact particularly our bigger iconic tourist destinations. And then of course the factors around unemployment following the end of the furlough scheme, consumer confidence inevitably, because that's linked to unemployment. If you feel like you're going to lose your job or you don't have any security of income, your consumer confidence is impacted, and we know that impacts how people spend money and how they visit the high street. The plus side is that house prices are seeing a bit of a boom, and historically people feel wealthier when their house is worth more, and that actually encourages spending. It's a cultural thing in the UK, but you know, we feel our value of our houses have improved. We feel a little bit more secure and a little bit more wealthy, and our confidence goes up as consumers, and therefore we're more ready to spend money. So those are the influences on footfall and the extent to which we will recover to what would have been a normal position. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Di. So if we can hand over then to Polly, who's going to give us an update on from social media and reflect on opening up from that perspective.
Thank you, Kathy. So for those of you that don't know what we do, we collect the data. During lockdown, we've been working with Google, and we crawl through Google Maps, and we've identified 3.9 million businesses, and we go back every day and collect their Twitter, Facebook and Instagram content, which enables us to deliver sentiment analysis across all of the businesses across the UK, broken down by all the boundaries. So this creates a great opportunity to really understand what places as a whole are saying, because we aggregate that data into boundaries. So I'm going to just skip through this presentation and show you, it's broken down by cities and by market towns, and look at those as a collective, taking a basket of cities and a basket of sort of markets or regional towns, and look at how that looks. So next slide, please, Kathy. Just before I start, I think this is very interesting. If you look at the hashtag shop local, there's a big jump in the volume of content around shop local, but a massive leap in the amount of engagement with it. So that means there are 41,000 posts during March and April around shop local, but there are 65,000 engagements on it, and that is up 531%. And I think that really demonstrates as a collective how, as Diane mentioned, we're all in this shop local world. Next slide, please. So moving on to the cities, this data is looking at the collective of all of the businesses within each boundary. So each line represents all of the businesses that we can identify in Google My Business in that place. And this shows us the percentage of organisations that have social media. The national average for the number of businesses that are active on social media in any given high street is 28%, which is quite depressing when you consider that 66% of the UK population spend 3 hours a day on social media. So what we can see here is the disparity between Manchester, who are sitting at 44% of businesses active on social media, down to Birmingham and Sheffield, who are sort of 25%. The graph on the right looks at the percentage of organisations that are active. So graph on the left, percentage of organisations that have social media, graph on the right, percentage of organisations that actually use it. The spike around the 20th of April is very interesting. We thought it was something to do with reopening. It wasn't. It looks like it was all to do with two things actually. The football row, should we say, the big football row. And Aldi and M&S had an amazing tiff that everybody got involved in around Cuthbert the cake. I don't know if you saw that, but it created a mass amount of local engagement. Next slide, please. How much content engagement are businesses creating? So these two graphs look at post volumes versus engagement. The drop on the graph on the left is not anything significant. It was actually Facebook's API dropping out. So that happens every now and then, and we can't control that. And so you can see how much content is being posted. And so you can see there's a trend, an upward trend as we approach reopening, and the engagement on the right. So we've got 10,000 posts creating 2.2 million engagements, and that's up from 1.9 in April. So the level of engagement increasing with businesses' content in each place as we move towards reopening. Next slide, please. These graphs look at on the left sentiment, and you can see what we've seen is a gradual increase in sentiment as we come out of the winter. But so that we score every single word based upon the sentiment of that word using artificial intelligence. So there's nothing to comment on other than it's positive. The graph on the right, the word cloud on the right, looks at the hashtags used within each place. And what we see in general, I think what's really exciting as we move into the reopening phase, this data is also in the High Street Task Force dashboard and can be matched against Springboard's data. Now we have reason to believe that places that are better about talking about themselves. So you see where you see the hashtag Manchester. In our experience from the financial data we have, perform better. So it'd be great to start to match that against the Springboard data. And there are some brands that really shine through, Pure Gyms being one of them, which we'll come on to in a minute, along with some other brands, which we'll talk about in a second. Next slide, please. So we just had a quick whiz of, next slide, please, looking at how brands are supporting, if you like, the reopening, particularly essential retailers. First, I have to talk about Primark, because as you all know, and Diane mentioned, when they opened up, there were huge queues. I don't believe that's magic. Anything you can buy in Primark, you can buy online. But they've behaved better than Boohoo and ASOS on social media during lockdown. They have held their customers' hands. They've helped them celebrate birthdays alone, paint their nails. They've done an extraordinary job. If all of you responded to something on Primark right now, I guarantee you within 10 minutes, you'd all have a response. They have served their customers through lockdown. We're working with places to help local independents understand how they can jump on Primark's queue and invite customers to their business. Tesco's, interestingly, when pubs opened, said, "Don't come and buy beer from us. Go and buy it from your local pub." Missed opportunity. I think they didn't warm that up and invite pubs to put their picture of their beer gardens on the post. Massive engagement, but I've never seen national business actually solicit local engagement like they are at the moment. And I think there's a huge opportunity for places to engage with these conversations. And Aldi, another one, doesn't sell online, but do an extraordinary job on social media. And the Cuthbert example was one of them, but they'll shout out security guards for doing nice things. And these businesses that are holding their customers' hands are doing incredibly well financially. But also the opportunity of places to engage them is extraordinary. Next slide, please. Primark has been the king of the conversation in all places until Pure Gyms opened, and Pure Gyms have taken over that mantle. We're seeing the hashtag Pure Gym pop up and across places across the UK. They're doing an extraordinary job of engaging the local audience, telling them what they're doing to stay safe. Every post has massive engagement and engage across the conversation in each place. Next slide, please. So here's an example within Bristol. You can see how Pure Help is actually as big a conversation as the place itself. They've literally saturated the conversation through every town where they have a presence. Next slide, please. Looking at smaller towns, really interesting to see the different level of social media engagement. So the number of businesses with an active social media is on the up. This is an increase. So here you can see the lowest is Morton the Marsh, sort of 38% up through to Leamington Spa, where you've got just 58% of businesses with a social media account. If you look on the right, you can see how the percentages that are active, again, are much more significant than in cities. The dip, it's interesting, Most local businesses tend not to post at the weekend, which is kind of crazy. Another thing we're working on. Next slide, please. Again, the dip here is a fallout with the Facebook API. It's returned. We've put the March data against the April data here, and what we can see is an increase in the level of engagement. So if we go March, there were 3,000 posts and 70,000 engagements. If you go to the next slide, please, you can see that there were 4,000 posts against 200,000 engagements on average. So there's not only the local businesses posting more, people are engaging with that content more. The extraordinary spike in Morton in Marsh was around Prince Philip's funeral, where one local business did something amazing, and it just demonstrates how one piece of activity can do something extraordinary, and that's what drove that piece of engagement. Next slide, please. You've got more bouncy, I don't know if the word, bouncy engagement sentiment score. You're more flipping up and down. There's a richer tapestry of content coming out of local towns. You can see from the word cloud on the right, this is from Chesterfield, how there's a much broader conversation which creates that more jerky sentiment score. But you can get a really good flavour for the place. You can see so Bird's Bakery as a business is delivering great conversation. Primark cutting through in the conversation, and that's what's driving that the queue that Diane sort of talked about. The key thing with the hashtag is that it's not about necessarily the business talking about themselves. It's what other people. It's other people engaging in that conversation. Next slide, please. And just to finish up, as regards from all the content we've looked at, what's shining through are local independent businesses doing a great job of showcasing why you should come back to them. These are two posts that had really positive sentiment and great engagement. The local bookshop here really painting the picture of what it's going to be like to go and browse that bookshop again. And you really you could smell the books. You've got a flavour for it. And on the right, hospitality opening up, showing what it looks like. And what we're seeing is businesses that are getting good at this are really pulling the crowds in. I think next slide, and I think that's me over and out. Thank you very much indeed.
Next, the data pack presents the latest data released on business and retail sales impacts of COVID-19 from Office for National Statistics. It is from a fortnightly survey performed by the ONS of all types of businesses across the UK. You will see the sector breakdown in the upcoming slides. This survey reference period is 19th of April to 2nd of May 2021, and over 9,000 businesses responded to this survey. Overall, if we look at trading status, 82.6% of businesses surveyed reported that they are currently trading, whilst 3.3% reported that they have permanently ceased trading. As the UK is currently in partial lockdown, 14.1% of surveyed businesses reported that they have temporarily closed or paused trading. Looking at turnover of businesses who are currently continuing to trade, 34.1% reported a decrease in turnover compared to what is normally expected for this time of year, whilst 13.8% reported that turnover had increased. 42.2% reported that their turnover had stayed the same. If we look at workforce, of the surveyed businesses who had not permanently stopped trading, 12.6% reported having staff on partial or furlough leave, whilst 54.7% of businesses' staff are in fact working in their normal place of work. 30.5% are working remotely instead of their normal place of work. Looking at the businesses who do continue to trade, accommodation and food service activities continues to suffer under the current lockdown restrictions, with 60.8% of surveyed businesses continuing to trade. However, this has improved as outdoor serving is now permitted, and possibly in the next data pack, we will see a further increase as indoor serving is permitted from 17th of May. Looking at the change from last survey period, where an increase in percentage means more businesses in the sectors are currently trading, we can see that majority of sectors have seen a positive change, with more businesses continuing to trade. Especially in the other service activities sector, we see an increase of 49.5%, as this includes hairdressers and beauty salons and so on that were allowed to reopen following the easing of restrictions on the 12th of April. Looking at the businesses who reported a decreased turnover, the arts, entertainment and recreation sector continues to see a significant financial impact of the pandemic due to lockdown restrictions. And this survey period, 66.7% of businesses in this sector currently trading reported their turnover has decreased. And the accommodation and food service activities sector follow closely, with 60.5% of businesses currently trading in this sector reporting a lower turnover this survey period. If we look at the change from last survey period in businesses reporting a decreased turnover, the graph shows that a decrease in percentage means that less businesses in the sector are reporting a decrease in turnover. So as we can see here, businesses in majority of sectors are faring better financially. Other service activities reported the greatest change, with 8.9% less businesses in this sector reporting a decreased turnover compared to previous survey period. In terms of the sector breakdown of businesses having a proportion of their workforce furloughed, the arts, entertainment and recreation sector had the largest proportion of their workforce furloughed at 40%, closely followed by the accommodation and food service activities sector at 38%. And looking at the change from last survey period in terms of the sector breakdown of businesses having a proportion of their workforce furloughed, where in this graph a decrease in percentage means a lower proportion of staff furloughed, we see that overall majority of sectors have less staff on furlough compared to previous survey period. The arts, entertainment and recreation sector actually saw the greatest change, with 13.1% less businesses reporting having staff on furlough leave. The wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles followed closely, with 9.9% less businesses reporting having staff on furlough leave compared to previous survey period. And this is most likely due to the easing of restrictions on 12th of April. Looking at the retail sales impacts of COVID-19, in March 2021, retail sales volumes increased by 5.4% compared to February 2021. And volumes were in fact 1.6% higher when compared with February 2020 pre-lockdown levels. This is reflecting the ease of lockdown restrictions on the 12th of April, when non-essential retail were allowed to reopen. And despite overall retail sales volumes increasing in March, online sales experienced a slight decrease, accounting for 32.8% of total retail sales in March, down from 34.6% the month before. Thank you for watching this month's recording of the Professional Research and Data Group COVID-19 Intelligence and Impact Update. If you would like to find out more about the High Streets Task Force, please visit the website at www.highstreetstaskforce.org.uk.